Rain clung to the morning like a sorrow that refused release, threading through the gray sky and dripping from the eaves of Whitcomb Manor in thin, persistent sighs. The house, once grand, now bore the quiet fatigue of years spent in disrepair, its windows dim, its hallways cold, its servants moving with the restrained caution of those who served a family fallen from favor. Honora Whitcomb felt the same weariness within herself as she knelt in the sodden garden, tugging at stubborn weeds her father insisted must be cleared before the arrival of his guest. Her muslin dress, already thinned from countless washings, clung to her damp skin, a streak of earth darkened the hem. She brushed her cheek with the back of a muddy hand and rose, wind-stung and flushed, unaware of how the day would turn. A carriage rumbled along the gravel approach, its wheels splashing through puddles. Honora stiffened. Her father had insisted she remain unseen until the afternoon, but the guest had come early. The housekeeper, Mrs. Harrow, appeared on the back step, breathless and flustered. "Miss Honora, your father wants you to greet his grace. At once. No time to change." Honora's stomach tightened. "His grace?" she echoed, hoping she had misheard. "The Duke of Ravensbury himself," Mrs. Harrow whispered, eyes wide with something between awe and pity. "Go, child. He's already inside." Honora glanced at her dress, streaked with rainwater and soil. Humiliation warmed her cheeks, but refusing her father's summons would only bring harsher words later. Gathering her composure, she hurried inside, each footstep leaving faint prints across the faded carpeting. Her father's voice drifted from the drawing room, smooth, rehearsed, eager. He saved such tones only for men whose wealth might lift him from debt. But another voice answered him, low, calm, carrying the kind of authority that did not need to be announced. It stirred the air in a way Honora could not explain. She hesitated outside the drawing room door. Her reflection in the brass doorknob showed loose strands of hair curled by the rain, a face too plain for society's liking, and a gown too worn to belong to anyone respectable. She inhaled slowly, bracing herself, and stepped inside. Lionel Whitcomb turned sharply toward her, irritation flashing in his eyes at her appearance. "Honora," he said with forced warmth, "you might have taken greater care with your presentation." Before she could apologize, her father stepped aside, revealing the guest seated opposite him. Alexander Hawthorne, Duke of Ravensbury, rose as she entered. Tall, impeccably dressed, and composed with a kind of restrained severity, he looked like a man accustomed to measuring the world and finding much of it wanting. His gaze met hers, steady, penetrating, unexpectedly gentle, and Honora felt her breath falter. She lowered her eyes at once, certain he was cataloguing every flaw her reflection had warned her of. "My daughter," Lionel said, gesturing impatiently. "Forgive her appearance. She has been handling chores." Honora curtsied, hoping the trembling in her knees would not betray her. "Your Grace," she murmured, wishing she could vanish into the floorboards. When she dared look up, she found the Duke studying her not with disdain, but with an expression she could not interpret, something contemplative, curious, touched softly by surprise. It unsettled her more than scorn would have. Before anyone could speak further, another presence breezed into the room with the scent of lavender and self-satisfaction. Lady Mariella Fenbrook, adorned in silks far too elaborate for a morning call, swept forward with a smile sharpened by superiority. "Mr. Whitcomb, I simply had to visit." Her eyes flicked to Honora's soaked sleeves and the smile grew colder. "Oh dear. It seems I've interrupted domestic duties." Honora felt heat rise to her throat. Mariella's gaze then darted to the Duke, lingering, assessing, already calculating what advantage she might claim. "Your Grace," she said with a shallow curtsy, "I did not expect to find you here." "What an honor." Alexander inclined his head politely, but his eyes returned to Honora as if trying to reconcile her presence with the room around her. She shifted her weight, tugging at her wet sleeve, wishing she could slip out unseen. The silence stretched, taut with unspoken judgment. Finally, her father clapped his hands once in false cheer. "Honora, do fetch refreshments." She nodded, grateful for escape, but as she turned, her muddy hem caught on a loose floorboard and tore with a soft rip that seemed thunderous in the quiet room. Mariella gasped behind a gloved hand. Honora froze, humiliated beyond speech. The Duke took an involuntary step forward as though to help her, then halted himself. "Miss Whitcomb," he said gravely, "are you hurt?" The gentleness in his question struck her like a blow. She shook her head quickly and fled before her father could scold her again. The corridor felt colder than the rain. She pressed a hand to her chest, forcing her breathing to steady. What must the Duke think of her? A girl half-soaked, stumbling, dressed in a gown unfit even for a maid? She could already imagine Mariella's laughter echoing through the county before nightfall. As she stood anchored in her shame, voices drifted from the drawing room once more. Her father spoke with obsequious eagerness. "I hope you will forgive my daughter's unfortunate state. She lacks refinement." Anora winced. But then came the Duke's voice, quiet, deliberate, carrying a weight that silenced the room. "I had expected something entirely different," he said. "But I find myself intrigued." Anora's breath caught. She had not meant to listen, yet the words rooted her to the spot. Intrigued? By what? Her disgrace? Her awkwardness? Or had he glimpsed something she had not realized she revealed? Lady Mariella's voice followed, sharp, incredulous. "Intrigued, your grace? Surely you jest." But Alexander's reply held no amusement. "No, I seldom speak in jest." Footsteps sounded, and Anora retreated into a side hall, heart unsteady, afraid of being discovered eavesdropping. She leaned against the wall, rainwater from her sleeves pooling faintly on the wooden floor. She knew nothing of the Duke beyond rumors, an aloof nobleman, difficult to please, impossible to impress. Yet something in his gaze had unsettled her, as though he saw not her tattered dress but the silent resilience beneath it. Still, she chastised herself for hoping. She knew her place, knew the distance between their stations, knew the cruelty of society too well to imagine anything beyond polite obligation. And yet, the word lingered. Intrigued. A carriage outside cracked its whip, and thunder rolled distantly across the hills. Anora straightened, smoothing her torn hem as best she could, though nothing could erase the scene that had unfolded. She swallowed hard, reminding herself that shame was familiar ground. She had lived in its shadow for years. But something had shifted, something uninvited, frightening, and strangely bright. She did not know it yet, but the Duke's first silent look had already altered the course of both their lives. And whispers, dangerous, hungry whispers, were already beginning to spread. Dawn unfurled with a pale, hesitant light over Whitcomb Manor, as though even the sun sensed the unease that had settled in its corridors since the Duke's arrival. Anora stepped into the garden where the earth still held the night's chill. She moved quietly, grateful for solitude after the humiliation of the previous day. Yet as she approached the weathered bench by the rose hedge, she halted. There, resting upon the old wood as though placed with deliberate care, lay a single white glove, immaculate, finely stitched, unmistakably aristocratic. Her heart stilled. No one in the household owned such a thing. She reached for it with cautious fingers, the leather soft beneath her touch. Tucked inside was a small slip of parchment bearing no words, only the faintest scent of bergamot. She closed her eyes, knowing at once who had left it. The Duke's carriage had rumbled away at first light, yet he had passed through this garden before departing. The realization sent a warmth through her, brief and bewildering. But with it came dread. If her father discovered this token, or worse, if Lady Mariella caught wind of it, scandal would blossom faster than the roses beside her. She hid the glove beneath her shawl and hurried indoors. The household had scarcely begun its morning bustle when Mrs. Harrow intercepted her. "Your father demands your presence, Miss Anora. He intends for you to attend the Fenbrook soiree this evening." The housekeeper's tone betrayed sympathy, for they both knew Anora owned no gown befitting such company. Mrs. Harrow added softly, "I shall mend your cousin's old dress. It may yet serve." Anora thanked her, though embarrassment pricked at her. She retired to her room and concealed the glove carefully within a drawer, unsure whether it was meant as kindness, apology, or something far more dangerous. Her thoughts drifted back to the Duke's eyes upon her, steady, searching, almost troubled. But she reminded herself he belonged to a world where gestures could mean nothing or everything with equal swiftness. By evening, carriages crowded the Fenbrook estate with the kind of polished splendor Anora had only observed from afar. She alighted with hesitation, her altered gown tugging uncomfortably at the seams. The candlelit windows blazed like watchful eyes. Inside, chandeliers sparkled above a swirl of silk skirts and polished boots. Anora moved carefully, hoping to be overlooked. She was not so fortunate. Lady Mariella appeared at her side with the precision of a hawk. "My dear Anora," she purred, "how brave of you to attend. One might almost believe you hope to attract someone's notice." Anora's pulse quickened. "I came at my father's request. Nothing more." Mariella's smile sharpened. "Of course. And yet rumor travels quickly. They say His Grace spoke your name with a curious warmth." She leaned closer. "One must be cautious, you know. Men of high rank seldom indulge in charity without intent." Before Anora could respond, A hush swept the room. The Duke had entered. Alexander Hawthorne carried an unspoken gravity that parted the crowd without command. Conversations stilled, fans trembled, and eyes, particularly those of ambitious mothers and their daughters, followed his every step. He nodded politely to the Fenbrooks, yet his gaze drifted across the room until it found Anora. Her breath caught and she lowered her eyes, wishing she could vanish into the wallpaper. But Alexander approached, each step deliberate, measured, impossible to misconstrue. "Miss Whitcomb," he said, bowing with impeccable grace, "would you grant me the first waltz?" Gasps fluttered across the drawing room like startled birds. Anora felt heat bloom along her throat. "Your Grace," she whispered, I fear such attention may invite misunderstanding." "Then let the misunderstanding be mine," he replied, offering his hand. His eyes held no mockery, only sincerity edged with something she dared not name. Her fingers trembled as she placed her hand in his. The orchestra hesitated, then resumed with a gentle swell. As the Duke guided her across the polished floor, Anora moved with surprising ease, though her heart pounded as though the music lived within her chest. His touch was steady, respectful, yet undeniably aware. "Are you displeased by my request?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "Only unprepared." "Then allow me to be the cause of your preparation," he murmured. Before she could form a reply, whispers surged around them, accusations of ambition, manipulation, impropriety. Anora felt the sting of each one. When the waltz ended, she stepped back, desperate to escape the scrutiny. But Mariella intercepted her again, joined by a ring of fashionable young women. "My, how quickly fortunes change," one sneered. A girl in a servant's gown attracting the Duke's pity. "Or his curiosity," Mariella added sweetly. "Such things seldom last." Anora braced herself for further cruelty, but a shadow fell across the group. Alexander stood behind her, expression calm but voice edged in steel. "If your amusement depends upon humiliating a lady," he said, "then I fear for the state of our society." Silence descended. Mariella blanched. Anora felt her pulse thunder in disbelief. The Duke turned to her and offered a faint bow before withdrawing, as though shielding her without claiming her, an act far more intimate than if he had taken her arm. Later, unable to bear the stares, Anora slipped into a quiet corner near the windows. The night air cooled her cheeks as she exhaled shakily. She wished the evening would end, wished she could understand why the Duke risked public censure on her behalf. Her thoughts scattered when she noticed something resting on the cushioned seat beside her. The white glove. But now, delicately placed inside its palm, was a single violet, small, pressed, impossibly fragile. She touched it with reverence, realizing with a flutter of fear that someone must have seen her react to the token he left in the garden. Whether it had been placed there by design, mischief, or malice, she could not say. Mariella's voice drifted nearby, sharp as broken glass. "Did you see her face? She blushes like a girl caught stealing. Mark my words, this rumor will be the talk of the county by morning." Anora closed her fingers around the glove, pulse trembling. She knew then that whatever passed between her and the Duke was no longer a private curiosity. It had been noticed, interpreted, twisted. And yet, beneath the dread curling in her chest, something warm flickered. He had chosen her for the waltz. He had defended her. And now, from some unknown corner of the soiree, he watched her with an expression both resolute and unreadable. The glove grew warm in her hands. A token. A danger. A promise she dared not hope for. And the scandal had only just begun. Rain swept across the countryside in restless sheets, casting Whitcomb Manor in a gray melancholy that mirrored Anora's thoughts. The scandal from the Fenbrook soiree had grown as swiftly as wildfire in dry fields. By morning, carriages had already passed along the lanes simply to carry whispers from one household to another. Anora felt the weight of every rumor pressing upon her shoulders as she moved through the corridors, wishing she could hide within the silence of some forgotten room. Yet fate, indifferent to her hopes, had other designs. Mrs. Harrow approached her after luncheon, wringing her hands in a manner Anora had never seen. "Miss Anora, His Grace has returned. Your father has gone out, leaving no instruction. The Duke waits in the old library. He asked to speak with you alone." Her tone faltered with meaning. Anora stilled. Her heart beat with a mixture of anticipation and dread. She knew the foolishness of entering a room alone with a man of his standing, especially now with the county's eyes upon them. Yet refusing him would be interpreted as disrespect. She smoothed her gown, though its fabric still bore signs of hurried mending after the previous evening's misfortunes, and walked toward the library. The air inside was cool and scented faintly of aged parchment. Candles flickered along the walls, their flames bending in the draught that slipped through the tall windows. Alexander stood near the hearth, gazing into the fire as though wrestling with a thought he had not yet dared to speak aloud. When he turned toward her, the glow illuminated the sharp lines of his face, softening nothing, revealing everything. "Miss Whitcomb," he said quietly, inclining his head, "I fear I am the cause of much discomfort for you. Yet I have returned because there are matters that must be addressed, not by society nor by your father, but by us." Honora closed the door with trembling fingers. "Your Grace, I beg you to consider the implications. If we are seen alone again—" "Then let us pray we are not," he replied, his tone steady though not unkind. "But if reputation alone governs our choices, we shall speak no truth in this lifetime." She lowered her gaze, uncertain whether he intended reproach or reassurance. "The rumors are cruel," she whispered. "They say I sought your attention, that I engineered the waltz, that I pretend to regard you beyond what is appropriate." Her breath trembled. "I assure you, Your Grace, I never wished for such notice." His expression softened. "No," he said. "You never sought it. That is precisely why you drew it." A flush rose to her cheeks. She stepped further into the room, hands clasped tightly to still her nerves. "Your kindness at the soiree was undeserved. But if you acted out of pity, I pray you will not feel obliged to extend it further. I have weathered mockery before. I will endure it again." Alexander moved toward her with measured restraint, as though mindful of every inch between them. "Pity?" he echoed. "Is that what you believe guided my actions?" Honora swallowed. "What else could it be? I am no one of consequence. My father's debts are known. We have lost our standing. My presence at the Fenbrook gathering was tolerated only because my family was once respectable. And I," she hesitated, shame tightening her throat. "I wore a borrowed gown." His brow furrowed. "You speak as though worth can be sewn into fabric or measured by coin. That is what the world believes. But not I," he said, voice deepening. "Not I, Miss Whitcomb." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the candles flickered again. Honora felt the air shift, felt his words settle upon her like a weight both frightening and strangely gentle. "Your Grace, you must not speak so," she whispered. "People already talk. They twist even what little they know." "Then let them twist it," he returned, stepping closer until the faint warmth of the hearth brushed both of them. "I have grown weary of polite facades and hollow admiration. Last evening, when I asked you to dance, I did so because I recognized something I have not seen in years: honesty without performance, dignity without vanity." His gaze traced her face with quiet intensity. "You looked at me as though I were merely a man, not a title." She felt the truth of that, felt also the peril it carried. "Forgive me, Your Grace, but that is precisely why this cannot continue. I know my place. I know the consequences. My father would use even a hint of your favor to bargain himself into advantage. Society would call me scheming." Her voice trembled as she added, "I cannot bear to be the cause of your ridicule." He drew a slow breath, as though mastering an emotion that threatened his composure. "Miss Whitcomb, ridicule touches me far less than you imagine. Power does not shield a man from loneliness." His eyes held hers with vulnerable candor. "When I met you in the drawing room, rain-soaked, unadorned, unexpectedly courageous, I felt something I had long forgotten the shape of." She dared a whisper. "What was it?" "Recognition," he said. "As though the world around me had been speaking in false notes all my life, and suddenly one true sound broke through." Her breath unsteadied. Emotion rose like a tide she feared to face. "Your Grace?" She looked away, unable to match the raw earnestness of his gaze. "I have little to offer any man, least of all one of your standing. I possess no dowry, no fine accomplishments to speak of. My upbringing has been irregular. And I know how I am regarded by those who measure worth in silks and lineage." He stepped still closer, but his voice remained low, tempered. "Those who measure worth in such things are blind. And blindness, Miss Whitcomb, has never guided my choices." A tremor passed through her. She forced herself to speak the truth that had lodged painfully in her heart. "Your Grace, affection is dangerous when it is unequal. I fear I may already think of you more than I should." His expression changed, sharpened with something fierce and quiet. "Then we are equal in danger," he murmured. "For I have thought of you far more than propriety allows." Before she could respond, the door burst open. A maid stood frozen on the threshold, eyes wide at finding them together. Honora's heart plummeted. The girl stammered an apology, backing away in a flurry of panic. The Duke's jaw tightened, but his composure remained unbroken. By morning half the county would know. Honora pressed a hand to her mouth, horror dawning. "This will ruin me," she whispered. Alexander's gaze held hers, steady, unwavering, resolute. "Not if I determine otherwise." But the fear in her chest tangled with something far more dangerous, hope. And as thunder rolled across the hills, Honora understood that nothing would ever be simple again. Whispers spread with merciless precision, traveling from estate to estate until even the most secluded corners of the countryside repeated the same tale. Miss Honora Whitcomb had been found alone with the Duke of Ravensbury in the library. Though the truth of the encounter held no impropriety, truth mattered little once society had scented scandal. Honora felt its sting in every passing glance, every hushed conversation that halted the moment she entered a room. By afternoon, even the servants moved with uneasy caution, as though proximity to her might invite misfortune. Her father summoned her to his study with a furious tremor in his voice. The room, cluttered with unpaid bills and empty wine glasses, smelled of desperation. "Do you understand what you have done?" Lionel Whitcomb demanded, pacing furiously. "The county is speaking of us, of you. They say you enticed his grace. They say you preyed upon pity. Do you not grasp what this will cost me?" Honora clasped her hands to still their shaking. "Father, I did nothing improper." His grace wished only to speak. "Speak?" he barked. "A duke does not speak with a girl of your standing unless he seeks advantage or amusement. Do not delude yourself. You will attend Lady Fenbrook's gathering tonight and apologize before the assembly. Publicly. You will state that your conduct was misinterpreted." Honora stared at him, horror rising. "I cannot lie." "You must," he snapped, his face flushing with anger and embarrassment. "If you do not, our name will be unsalvageable. I will not allow your foolishness to ruin what remains of this family." He dismissed her with a gesture, but as she turned to leave, she saw something in his expression beyond anger, fear. Not for her, but for himself. She walked out in silence, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she had been given a choice that was no choice at all. Evening came with oppressive stillness. Honora dressed with trembling hands, wearing the same altered gown from the previous night because nothing else remained suitable. Her reflection in the glass looked pale, fragile, and far too young to endure the judgment that awaited her. Yet beneath the fear, a quiet determination pulsed. She would not allow lies to dictate her dignity. Upon arriving at the Fenbrook estate, she felt every eye turned toward her. The drawing room brimmed with glittering gowns, poised postures, and sharp-tongued anticipation. Lady Mariella, radiant in pale blue silk, glided toward her with a triumphant smile. "Miss Whitcomb," she said sweetly, "how brave of you to attend after such unfortunate events. I trust you have come to clarify the misunderstanding." Honora swallowed, preparing to speak, but the murmurs in the room swelled. The crowd parted as the Duke entered. Alexander Hawthorne carried himself with calm command, though Honora sensed tension beneath his controlled demeanor. He wore the same composed mask he used in public, but his eyes, when they found hers, held something fierce and unyielding. Lady Fenbrook curtsied deeply. "Your Grace, we were just about to hear Miss Whitcomb's statement." Alexander's gaze shifted to Honora. "Statement? Of what nature?" Mariella's smile brightened, cruel in its confidence. "Why, of course, she must assure the company that the encounter in the Whitcomb library was an unfortunate circumstance, nothing of intent or meaning. We all wish to hear her deny the rumors." Honora felt her breath tremble. The room pressed inward, waiting. She lifted her chin. "I will not deny truth to appease falsehood," she said quietly, though her voice carried. "There was no impropriety, but neither will I feign shame for what I did not do." Gasps swept the assembly. Mariella's smile vanished. Her father stepped forward, face flushed with rage. "Honora, you will apologize." Before she could answer, Alexander spoke. "No," he said, his voice steady and commanding. "She will not." The room fell into stunned silence as he stepped between Honora and the crowd, addressing the assembly with a clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. "If Miss Whitcomb is guilty of impropriety, then so am I. For I sought her company. I requested her presence. And I will not allow her to bear the weight of society's inventions." Honora's knees weakened. Her father's fury erupted. "Your Grace, you cannot. This is absurd. She has brought ruin upon herself and upon—" Alexander turned to him with a look that could silence storms. "What ruins a lady's character is not her conduct, but the malice with which others interpret it. Mariella, trembling with indignation, stepped forward. Your Grace, surely you do not intend to defend her further. It would suggest. It suggests precisely what it must, he interrupted coldly. That I value honor above gossip, sincerity above pretense, and Miss Whitcomb's dignity above your amusement. Honora's heart thudded painfully. She whispered, Your Grace, you must not. This will harm your standing. He looked at her then, and the mask he wore for the world slipped for a heartbeat. What is a title, he murmured, if I cannot offer it to the woman who stirred my dormant heart? Her breath caught. She could not speak. The room erupted with murmurs and shocked glances. Before she could gather her composure, her father strode forward, face pallid with fury and fear. This cannot proceed, he hissed. Honora is promised. Honora turned, stunned. Promised? To whom? To the Hargrave family, he said bluntly. Their son will take you as wife in exchange for the clearing of my debt. The arrangement stands. You will not reject it. The room fell into a tense hush. Alexander's expression sharpened with quiet, controlled outrage. You would barter your daughter's future for coin? He asked, voice dangerously soft. For survival, Lionel retorted. Honora stepped back, feeling the walls close in. A pawn. That was all she had ever been to her father. Despair threatened to choke her, but Alexander's steady presence anchored her. Miss Whitcomb, he said gently, do you wish for this arrangement? Her voice came out in a whisper. No, Your Grace. Lionel lunged forward. She has no choice. Alexander faced him fully, unflinching. Then I shall give her one. His words rang like a challenge issued to the entire room. But Honora knew this battle was far from over. Her father's debts, society's expectations, the Hargrave claim, all stood like immovable walls between them. Yet in the center of that glittering, judgmental crowd, Alexander's resolve became something solid, something undeniable. The first true declaration had been made, and the storm it summoned was only beginning. Night had scarcely surrendered to dawn when Alexander Hawthorne left Ravensbury Manor with a determination that burned hotter than the cold wind sweeping across the moors. The Hargrave estate rose ahead, stern, imposing, and fortified by pride rather than stone. He did not bother with formalities. The butler, startled by the Duke's arrival at such an hour, stepped aside without protest. Alexander's boots struck the marble floor with the authority of a man who had endured enough of society's hypocrisy. Lord Hargrave greeted him in the study, lips curled in satisfaction. Your Grace, he drawled, an early visit from a duke is most irregular. I presume you have come regarding the Whitcomb debt. I have, Alexander said, removing his gloves with measured calm. I intend to settle it. Hargrave raised a brow. An admirable gesture, but unnecessary. The arrangement stands. The girl will marry my son. It is a matter already decided. No matter is decided until both parties consent, Alexander replied. Hargrave's laugh was short and cold. Consent? My dear Duke, Miss Whitcomb is of no consequence. Her father has bartered her future for financial rescue. She will abide. Alexander leaned forward, voice low with restrained fury. You mistake her compliance for willingness. She will not be forced. She has no choice, Hargrave countered. Unless you mean to pay more than coin. Unless you intend to tarnish your own name for a girl who brings you nothing but scandal. Alexander's jaw tightened. I would sooner tarnish my name than allow her to be used as a ledger entry. Then you have lost, Hargrave said, rising. For I will accept no payment. The only resolution is her marriage into my family, or her ruin. And with that, he dismissed the Duke with the arrogance of a man who believed the world shaped itself to his desires. Alexander left without another word, his resolve sharpened to a blade's edge. If they meant to force Honora into ruin, then he would ensure the world saw her worth before they attempted to bury it. At Whitcomb Manor, chaos had taken root. Lionel paced the drawing room, muttering frantically over accounts and threats. Honora stood near the window, pale and exhausted from a night without rest. When she glimpsed Alexander's carriage stop at the gate, her breath froze. He entered the manor with purposeful steps, his presence filling the shabby room with a gravity it had never known. Miss Whitcomb, he said, bowing slightly, though his eyes sought hers with far more than courtesy. I understand your father has informed you of the Hargrave claim. Honora nodded, her voice strained. There is nothing to be done. My father insists the arrangement will stand. He says it is the only means of preserving our name. Your name, Alexander corrected gently, is not preserved by being traded. Lionel's face flushed. Your Grace, I will not tolerate interference. You will tolerate truth, Alexander interrupted, not unkindly but with a firmness that brooked no argument. You have bound your daughter to a family that sees her as currency. Anora stepped forward, her composure wavering. Your Grace, please. You must not involve yourself further. The Hargraves have made their terms clear. They will not accept payment, not even yours. Then they will accept something else, Alexander said. He turned to her fully, his expression unguarded for the first time. I cannot allow them to claim what they have no right to. Nor can I allow you to sacrifice yourself to a life you do not choose. Her breath trembled. What alternative remains? One, he answered softly, though it is bold and irrevocable. Her heart thudded painfully. Lionel sputtered, Your Grace, you cannot mean. But Alexander did not look at him. His gaze remained fixed on Anora, steady as the rising sun. If you will permit it, he said quietly, I would ask for your hand. Not out of obligation. Not out of pity. But out of regard, deep, sincere regard that no rumor has tarnished and no scandal can shake. Anora stared at him, struck breathless. She felt the room fall away, leaving only his voice, his certainty, his breathtaking defiance of every rule that governed their world. Your Grace, she whispered, such a step would bind you to my father's disgrace. My life is not governed by your father's misdeeds, he replied. And my title is not diminished by choosing a woman of integrity. Lionel staggered backward as though struck, realizing his plans were collapsing. Anora, you cannot accept. You owe. I owe nothing to those who sell me, she said quietly, surprising them both with her steadiness. Alexander extended his hand, not kneeling like a courtier performing duty, but standing as a man offering devotion. Miss Whitcomb. Anora, will you choose a future that belongs to you? Her eyes glistened. 4 years she had lived beneath the shadow of her father's debts, society's cruelty, and expectations that crushed her spirit. Yet here stood a man of immense power offering not rescue but respect. I choose you, she whispered. The words released something in him, something fierce and profoundly relieved. He stepped closer, taking her trembling hand in his. Lionel collapsed into a chair, defeated, irrelevant to the moment unfolding before him. Within hours, the announcement spread across the county. The Duke of Ravensbury intended to marry Miss Anora Whitcomb, a girl mocked in rain-soaked muslin. A girl society had deemed unworthy. The reversal of the scandal was swift and thunderous. Gossip turned to awe, derision to admiration. The Hargraves, seeing their influence shattered, withdrew their threats in stunned silence. On the day of the wedding, sunlight filled the chapel in soft golden hues. Anora walked toward Alexander in an ivory gown simple yet radiant, stitched with quiet elegance. Inside the lining, hidden from the world, rested the white glove and the pressed violet, tokens of shame transformed into symbols of cherished beginning. When she reached him, Alexander took her hands with reverence. From the moment I saw you, he whispered, I thought fate unkind. I see now it was merciful. Tears brightened her eyes. And I, she murmured, thought myself invisible. Yet you saw me. Their vows echoed through the chapel, steadfast, unornamented, true. As they stepped into the sunlight afterward, the air seemed warmer, the world wider, the future theirs. The whispers that had once sought to destroy them faded into nothingness. For the quiet courage of one woman and the unwavering devotion of one man had rewritten not only their fate, but the story society had tried to tell in their place. And love, unexpected, unbidden, and fiercely chosen, stood victorious.